Welcome to CS Teaching Talks, where research meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Tomford, and when I'm not reading papers or discussing them here, you can find me teaching computer science to pre-service teachers at Ryoo University. Today's paper is called Centering Minoritized Students' Perspectives: What Makes CS Learning Consequential. It's by Wei, Jean Ryoo, and Alicia Morris, all out of Los Angeles Unified School District and UCLA. It was published in the conference Proceedings of SIGSI in March 2023, and I'm delighted to welcome this week's guests to discuss and digest this wonderful paper.
Hi, my name is Catherine Goyette, pronouns she, her. I am currently computer science coordinator for California Department of Education, but prior to that, my first roles in education was teaching kindergarten, first, second, and sixth grades.
My name is Patrick Esther, he, him pronouns. I write content for a company called Codio. We're a computer science education platform. Before that, I taught computers and computer science at some small private schools from kindergarten all the way through ninth grade.
Great. Today we're looking at this paper entitled Centering Minoritized Students' Perspectives: What Makes CS Learning Consequential? This is by Wei, Jean Ryoo, and Alicia Morris, all from Los Angeles. So fun California paper, at least for me, for Kat. Let us attempt a summary.
This was a paper that took some qualitative data through interviews of, I believe it was 30, there were 30 students 3 years after they experienced a high school CS course. And they were in large public school district on the West Coast, it says. And so going through that, they began the paper by talking a little bit about the context of the CS for All movement that began in 2016 and the need for equity and inclusion and what that looks like from the student voice. And so what they found in their results was that consequential learning, as they're calling it, students remembered and felt was valuable, aligned to 3 different themes when they coded it. So the freedom to express personal interests, passions, and concerns was the first theme. A second theme was the opportunities for these students to expand their views of CS for themselves and for the world. And thirdly was their teachers caring for them individually, for the learning community, and for the subject matter. There were some pull quotes from some of this data, as well as those overall themes.
Let's dig into some of the concepts and vocabulary so we can get our minds around this, and then we can go into hot takes. So I first want to start with the idea of a justice stance toward equity. So this is in section 2.1. I think this is specific language around equity. Like a lot of the times we get papers that are about equity or about social justice, but this is actually putting them together in a very specific definition. So they say, by taking a justice-centered approach to equity, we question the current CS education structure and agenda that have systematically excluded women and students of color, with the goal of supporting youth to resist oppression while aiming for transformative CS learning experiences. How do you feel about that?
It's one of those things where you see a lot of vocabulary and they'll talk about oppression or pursuit of peace and freedom instead of militarism, occupation, surveillance, and expansionism. You see a lot of these big words, and this is easy for me to say because I'm no longer in the classroom, but this is not the first paper to talk about this, and it certainly won't be the last. And if we're going to be serious about this, then I think we need to take the paper at what it says. And, if we truly believe in these things, then we need not to say, well, that idea makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm really willing to do that, but I really want more CS education for everyone. I want greater diversity. I want, at some point you have to sit there and be like, I need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I need to start to work on these ideas. That was one of the things that struck me in this paper is the language used here is something that we've seen many times. And so I think it's time to just say okay, we need to take it at face value and get comfortable with these terms and what it means and be critical about how we conduct ourselves with students.
I appreciated this approach and the term justice-centered CS education because it is calling on us to analyze the system as it stands and to realize that just simply saying we want CS for all may not be enough, and that we have to look at a history of inequities and see why those inequities are there, and how can we disrupt that status quo, and what are the reasonings behind it, and let's look at student voice. We will say we want CS for all and we say we want equity, but if we really want to have action behind that, we need to analyze why they exist in the first place and take a critical look at our school systems.
And you can't make substitutions either. We talk a lot about money or professional development or infrastructure or, just putting computers in students' hands. You can't just say like, well, if we just allocate more money, if we just give them the right PD, if we do all these things, like we don't have to do what this paper says.
Yeah, Patrick, I'm happy you brought up that concept of, kind of addressing the system as a whole, making sure everyone has computers, that kind of thing, which is really echoed in the paper. In one of the statements on the first page, it says, underrepresented communities' interests are served only when they are aligned with the political and economic interests of dominant groups, which is one of the tenets of critical race theory that was applied to technology.
You're not radicalizing the youth of tomorrow, right? This isn't like some kind of brainwashing program. They're excited. I made this app. It talks about infection, and I really want to become a biologist and look at all the stuff that I showed. And I want to talk about what happens if I socially distance. So I had to learn all the really hard stuff. All of these things, any teacher will look at and say, I want that. I want that in my classroom, right? And so this paper uses language that may make us feel uncomfortable, but the learning outcomes that they're showing and highlighting, that's what we want. And I think like we get caught up on the vocabulary. And so maybe you can tone down how you talk about it, but I think in practice you can implement it, and you're not going to make like these radicalized use that people fear is going to happen when they hear, things like justice centered or critical race theory and things like that.
Well, speaking of the vocabulary, the next term that needs unpacking is consequential learning, which is one of the terms from the title. And so section 2.2 tries to explain what consequential learning means.
When I first read it, I was just like, oh, what makes learning important to the student? Like this intrinsic thing. It really is at its heart, you question power dynamics and you allow space for non-dominant cultures to flourish. And then the students really take a lot out of the course. And so I think it has, again, some of the vocabulary that might make, you feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, you're giving space to students to take this subject matter and make it meaningful for themselves. I mean, obviously, you're going to help them make it meaningful, but you're allowing that space for the subject matter and the students to kind of breathe and kind of wrestle with it and then be like, this is what I want to do with it. And then it's actually meaningful at the end of the term or the project.
I appreciate that this is asset-based for the students, this approach. Consequential learning is all about valuing the students and their voice and their perspective in determining what is it that is not working for them, not what we as educators believe they should be learning or they should be accomplishing, but actually centering their experience and considering that, which I think we often either forget to do or don't quite know how to collect that data, but it's so important because that's who we're serving. I think we need more of that in all of education.
Yeah, this paper is one of those rare birds, a longitudinal study in computer science education, which is very valuable. They took a grounded theory approach. They ask open-ended questions to students and then try to find the trends and patterns in the responses, so that the ideas essentially come from the subjects instead of being imposed on them. The two questions they ask were, in retrospect, when students reflect on previous CS learning experiences, which do they articulate as most valuable? And number two, from students' perspectives, what factors contributed to making those experiences memorable and consequential?
I like that the questions are very focused on what the students actually feel is valuable, and that we're asking what was memorable and consequential to them. So sometimes questions will be, do you remember what you learned? maybe I don't really care. But this way, was it valuable to me as a student? So that helps to have that more student-centered, asset-based approach, because you're actually asking them as a student, did you find this valuable?
And I found that the word valuable reminded me of interest development theory. We read a paper about that a few months ago, and the idea was interest is not just being interested in something. There are three components of it. There's belonging, knowledge, and value. And so this really gets at what was valuable. Do you value your experience? Do you value computer science in a way that a lot of the measures of interest do not get to?
Really, this helps us to look at the humanity of why computer science might be valuable to a person. I feel that this is a nice holistic type approach that we often do not consider.
Well, the next part of the paper goes into kind of summarizing the student interviews and classifying them into trends. How did you feel about reading the student interviews?
I loved this section because I saw that students are being empowered to look at something they're interested in now. All of the examples were actually them wanting to make their world a better place in the context of whatever that happened to be surrounding them. And what I especially loved about that is that I find that many times there are canned curriculums that don't allow for this opportunity. And the fact that this was what they remembered and what stuck out to them gave me some hope that this is what we need to do. This is the work that as educators we need to do, is engage our students, not in what we think is best for them, but for them to say, I want to use my learning for a reason. Like, there's a purpose for this. I'm learning computer science, and now I can use that computer science to actually make a difference today. Like, that is, I think, the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I love how you put that, bringing it back to being consequential, right? It's not just fun or engaging. It has consequences, genuine consequences for the student identity, their community, their society. And the paper says, importantly, youth were not moved by superficial opportunities to personalize projects, such as choosing the colors for a website or an area of focus alone. Kat, I see you smiling for that. Does this resonate?
I think the challenge is that educators often feel like, I don't know how to do that, because what if I've heard teachers say this, that, in this project-based, problem-based, opportunity-based approach, what if the students want to do something that I don't know how to help them with? That's opportunity right there. Like, don't you want your students to say, wow, there's nothing in the textbook, so to speak, that tells me how to solve this problem. Maybe I need to go be resourceful and figure it out. That's what we want, is kids that want to learn and have a reason to learn. So this really spoke to my passions as being someone that loves project-based learning and allowing students to really direct their own path in regards to how they can apply and answer their own questions and make the world a better place.
Let's move on to the next section of the interviews, 4.2, opportunities for youth to expand their views of CS and self in the world. Patrick, what stood out to you in this section?
The simple fact that students decided not to become CS majors in college, and the paper painted that as like, that's a win. They took that knowledge and they used it, whether it's just communicating with friends or just that experience is staying with them and is still providing value. There are lots of ways we can define that without being a CS major. They didn't waste their time in high school by taking this class.
So then that's computer science not as a specific skill set that's goal-oriented or career-oriented. It's kind of what they reference in the last paragraph of the section is a computer science experience that transforms a worldview, makes how you see and relate to problems or the world or technology different. And I love that as a consequence, because that's like literally one consequence of me having taken this class is now I look at the world differently. The next section was teacher care for students, learning community, and subject matter. What do you think?
There's a lot of research in the overall educational scheme that speaks to the importance of the teacher-student relationship. So if a teacher is reading this, they can see what this actually meant. Okay, it meant that as a teacher, I saw that some of my students needed resources and I helped them find some extra laptops. I saw that students were struggling with a particular concept and I gave them a resource for that concept. There were specific actions that an educator could try and replicate.
We often, I'm including myself in this, we often take teachers for granted. And you read this story, this could have been a teacher in any subject matter, and you've been like, wow, I want my child to learn from them, right? You're just like, that warms my heart reading what the students had to say about this particular teacher.
So I want to move this into the so what. Let's just start with that section, that teacher care part of making learning consequential. If these findings are shown to a teacher or an administrator or a school system, what actions do you think they should motivate?
I think administrators have the data with meta-analysis of numerous studies over the last decades to show that having that teacher-student relationship is important. I think they have it, but I think that these anecdotes are necessary to remind them of the importance of student voice, and that oftentimes we look at test scores or we look at, whatever in evaluating teachers, but how often do we ask what has been the impact with the students from their perspective?
Well, I want to look at the conclusions of this paper through a specific lens. The study was conducted on high school students and then come back to talk to them again when they're later in high school or in college. But I wonder how we can apply any of these learnings to sometime before the high school experience when students are younger.
One of the challenges that I've seen lately is there's, in some areas, such a focus on boosting the high school computer science course enrollments that we don't consider that it's not all about these elective courses. We have to start sooner. And so we find a way that we can broaden what computer science can mean, and that's actually a foundational literacy that we need students to understand. Students are entering this world where technology is everywhere, and they need to understand the algorithmic bias that is in existence and the capabilities and limitations of technology and how it works with our systems and our humanity. And so I think that holistic approach is necessary for K-8 as well, or we have missed the boat.
This is opportunities for youth to expand their views of CS and self in the world. I would love to say that, when I was in the classroom and I met the students one time a week for a year, that I accomplished that. So we shouldn't just wait until high school and be like, oh, well, they've grown up a bit more. It's just like, yeah, but like this idea of seeing themselves in relationship to this technology, it should grow as their exposure to the technology goes. Just every step of the way, we should be striving for this. And by the end of their journey, hopefully they'll even have a better view of themselves and how it relates to CS in the world.
I want to give us time to say some key takeaways. What are you taking away from this paper?
I think this paper made it more clear than other papers you read that are similar to this, that you can have names of frameworks and approaches that make you uncomfortable with the vocabulary that they use, but they give you the learning outcome that you desire. But the end result, I think, is what we want. And it doesn't look as scary when you see it from that point of view.
So my takeaway is that if you are trying to do work that is impacting a minoritized population, you need to talk to that population and you need to get your input from them and not place your values and your assumptions on them. We have to go deeper and we have to go to the people that we say we are trying to help and make sure that we say, we see you have assets and we want to know what those are and how this can align to your values. And so, again, you can't help people without knowing them. You have to know who they are and what they're interested in, what their passions are, if you truly want to increase opportunities in a way that's going to resonate with them.
Well, that about wraps up another evidence-based episode of CS Teaching Talks. I really enjoyed discussing this paper, and thank you so much to all of our guests and to Wei Wei, Jean Ryoo, and Alicia Morris for giving us Centering Minoritized Students' Perspectives, What Makes CS Learning Consequential. Please join us for future discussions around computer science education. We meet Tuesdays and Fridays, and you can find all our information about that and what paper we're reading this week at csedresearch.org. Please also reach out if you have questions or if you'd like to share recommendations for papers. You can email us at podcast@csedresearch.org, and we look forward to hearing from you. The CS Teaching Talks podcast is presented by csedresearch.org and Reach University. Funding has been provided by the Association of Computing Machinery's Special Interest Group for Computer Science Education and Amazon Future Engineer. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time.